Mike was the director of a global corporation, while Jake worked as a construction laborer. Though their lives were very different, their wives shared a common connection. They both worked at the same school. Mike's wife, Laura, was a teacher, and Jake's wife, Sarah, was the school secretary. As the school year approached, Mike and Laura decided it was time for a kitchen renovation. Mike knew Jake did side work and asked if he'd be interested in giving them a quote. Jake agreed and arranged to stop by on a Friday, which happened to be Mike's day off. In Mike's spacious modern kitchen, Jake began taking measurements, quietly jotting down notes for the estimate. Meanwhile, Mike, eager to relax, retreated to the living room to watch TV. The day seemed peaceful until both men's phones rang simultaneously. It was their wives calling with unsettling news. The school was facing budget cuts and layoffs were imminent. Those without tenure were especially at risk, including Laura. Jake hung up the phone silently and resumed his work while Mike froze. His heart pounded, palms damp with sweat. If Laura lost her job, their plans for the kitchen renovation would have to be cancelled. Worse, Mike would need to dip into their savings to cover just a month's worth of expenses. Beyond that, he'd have to borrow from family. On top of everything, he'd recently co-signed for his daughter's new car and started making the payments. The thought of these mounting financial pressures tightened in his chest. Desperate for some comfort, Mike wandered into the kitchen, intending to pour himself a glass of wine. But there was Jake, still calmly whistling while finishing up the estimate. "Did you hear the news?" Mike asked, his voice tense. "Yeah," Jake replied with a shrug. "It's unfortunate, but we'll be okay." Mike stared, baffled. How could Jake, a man who earned less, be so calm about potentially losing a significant part of their income? If Mike, with his high salary, was in a panic, shouldn't Jake be even more worried? Moments later, Mike's phone rang again. It was Laura, telling him she was safe from the layoffs. A wave of relief washed over him. Finally, he could breathe again. Shortly after, Jake received a text from Sarah. She hadn't been as lucky. Her position was terminated and she'd be home early. Jake simply replied, "Sorry to hear that," and shared the news with Mike. "I'm sorry, man," Mike said sympathetically. Jake smiled, untroubled. "No worries, we'll pull through." Jake packed up his tools and left, leaving Mike standing in the kitchen utterly perplexed. How could Jake be so unfazed by this? The answer, as Mike would soon realize, was simple. Jake and Sarah lived within their means and had few monthly expenses. They owned an acre of land in the countryside, built their own home, and paid off their 15-year-old truck years ago. Jake often joked he'd drive it until the engine melted. Their 17-year-old daughter had even bought her own used car with the money she earned from mowing lawns and baking bread one summer. Thanks to their frugal lifestyle, Jake and his family had $50,000 in savings, not counting their retirement fund. Mike's situation was far different. He still owed nearly $700,000 on his $1.2 million property, not including taxes and interest. He and Laura had only recently finished paying off their student loans. Mike leased a luxury car while Laura was 2 years into payments on a brand new one. Maintaining their pool added another expense, and the kitchen renovation would be funded by a low-interest loan they'd just been approved for. On top of that, Mike was covering the monthly payments for his daughter's car, a sweet 16 gift from the dealership. When Jake returned home that evening, he found Sarah wiping a few tears, saddened by the loss of her job. But they quickly decided she could help Jake with his growing workload, organizing the paperwork he'd never been good at. Her mood lightened when Jake suggested they cook a nice chicken dinner to celebrate a fresh start. Meanwhile, Mike picked up a pizza for his family, grateful that the day's crisis had passed. At dinner, he expressed his relief to Laura, grateful she hadn't lost her job. They all felt a sense of renewal and hope for the future. Later, as they talked, he joked about Jake's raggedy old truck, using it as an example to teach their daughter a lesson. Work hard, study, and get into a good college, he said, so you don't end up like Jake and Sarah. But as Mike said those words, a question lingered in his mind. Or should she? Discover 5 Frugalities, Biblical Principles for Financial Wisdom by Charles Jose. now available on Amazon for Kindle and paperback. This book offers timeless financial wisdom rooted in biblical principles. Don't miss out on this essential guide to managing your finances wisely. Click on the link in the description below for more information.